I'm Dave Fotsch. I'm the director of Boise Green Bike. It is a program that has been in existence for a little over 3 years. And I'm going to tell you, first of all, our story, and then we'll get into some of the options that might be available to other communities throughout the state. So this is our basic agenda. Our story, we'll talk about the various kinds of bike share that exist out there. And then we're going to have you ask some questions about why you might want bike share in your community. Talk a little bit about the operations side of it, federal funding, Dhoklas bike share, which is the new thing on the horizon, and some other options. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions, if I haven't touched on something that you want to know. So our story is a pretty simple one. I used to work for the Central District Health Department. I was the public information officer there for almost 9 years. And toward the end of my time there, I started seeing stories in the media about bike share. I should note that bike share in the U.S. is an industry that is less than 10 years old. And I started thinking about bike share as a public health initiative. If we can put people on bikes instead of in their cars, they're going to get some exercise. The CDC says that we all need about 30 minutes of exercise every day in order to stay healthy. And if you can substitute car trips with bike trips, you will get closer to that 30 minutes of exercise every day. I also argued to my director that this would be a way of improving air quality because people will be driving less, and that it would relieve traffic congestion because we would be putting bikes on the road instead of additional cars. And lo and behold, he bought it. And he said, go forth and be fruitful. And so I did some more research, and we brought together a group of stakeholders, community leaders, and we started talking about the steps that would be necessary to launch a bike share system. We wanted to try and get community buy-in, so we had representatives from the Transit Authority, from Boise State University, from the city, from ACHD, from the nonprofit sector. And we were also fortunate that at the time, Boise State University had a program in community planning. And they stepped in and did some of the initial research for us on how big a system should be, where the stations should be located, and things like that. And with that, we had some legitimacy. We had some valid research done by the university. So we started applying for grants, and I hit what I call the Rotary circuit. I talked to every Rotary group in the community and a bunch of other organizations trying to build support for the program. And well, this is a screenshot from the final product of the research at Boise State University. It's a heat map. The research that they did looked at the metropolitan area, basically an area starting on the west from the Western Idaho Fairgrounds or Expo, Idaho, and going all the way out to Lucky Peak. It looked at about 15 different layers of data, everything from population density to employment density, where there is housing, where there are attractors, things that would drive trips like the University of Boise State University, theater, arts, museums, libraries, things like that, even ATMs. One of the layers was also transit, because bike share can provide a link to transit, allowing you to get to your final destination if you take a bus into town. So this heat map centered on the middle of town, where the most of these different layers of data overlapped. And the areas in red represent those areas they thought would be most productive for bike share stations. The initial plan said that we needed about 140 bikes and 14 stations. I should note that at the time, we were looking at a dock-based system because the world of bike share at that time, and we're talking only 6 years ago, was primarily dock-based. So that is what we chose going forward. And once we secured funding, which was about a 3-year process, we went to request for proposal. We got 6 proposals, and one of them came from a startup organization out of New York City called Social Bicycles. They offered an operating system that was a little different from the traditional dock-based systems, and they prevailed. So they won the bid, and then we started the negotiations on the contract. And back in March of 2015, our equipment finally arrived, and we are a service of Valley Regional Transit. We had everything delivered to the Happy Day Transit Center out in Caldwell because they had these open storage bays. They had a facility that we didn't yet have in Boise. And so we started putting the bikes together and assembling the various parts of the system. And then on April 15th of 2015, we had an event that we called First Look. We rushed to get 15 bikes together and 1 station so we could show the media what bike share is going to look like in their community. We had the CEOs from our 2 title sponsors, St. Luke's and SelectHealth, come to speak to us, and there was much hoopla and cheering by the crowd that gathered. So I mentioned that we had based our initial launch on a dock-based system, and what we had was a little different. It was similar. Our bikes can be locked to any bike rack, but we prefer that they be locked to the racks at our station hubs. This is a map of the system as it started. We started with 114 bikes at 15 stations. And it didn't take long for us to figure out that 15 stations was not nearly enough to serve the public. If you lock the bike to an ordinary rack away from one of our hubs, there's a $2 fee. That's enough of a disincentive to get people to just not ride the bike or choose some other form of transportation. They might just get in their car. So we started at Boise State University installing what we call flex hubs. They're ordinary bike racks that we label with a sign or a sticker as a place where you can lock the bikes. On our side of the operation, it's super simple to create a hub because we just draw a geofence around a certain area. And the bikes are all equipped with GPS tracking, so they know when they're inside that geofence. So let's turn to today. This is a screenshot of most of our stations. We have 81 station hubs and flex hubs, and we've grown our fleet a little bit to 127 bikes, but now we have almost 13,000 active members. And this year so far, our riders have taken over 10,000 trips. As you may have seen, all of our trips this month are free. I hope you've taken advantage of that. That has helped our numbers a lot. We've attracted almost 1,000 new members so far this month. So it's a well-used system. We get, on average, about 25,000 rides a year, and we hope to continue to grow that into the future. So I have referenced some of the different kinds of bike share systems out there, and now I'd like to go into a little detail on what's what. Let's start with the relative grandfather of bike share, dock-based systems. Back when we were first investigating bike share, this is about all there was out there, and there was one major player known as B-Cycle. It's now a division of Trek Bicycle Corporation. The limitations of this are that every trip must start and end at a dock. The clock continues to tick until you push the bike into the dock. The downside of dock-based systems is that they tend to be pretty expensive. The bikes run anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500 a piece, and then the dock stations can run upwards of $50,000 to $60,000. So it starts to get very expensive very fast. We had looked at B-Cycle. We, in fact, got a proposal from them, but their costs were a lot more than what we ultimately came up with, which was the Social Bicycles model. We consider this a smart bike model, whereas the docked-based systems are a smart dock dumb bike. The bikes that we use have a little computer on them. It's a tracking computer. It has the GPS technology, so we get a record of every trip that's taken. And as I mentioned, these bikes can be locked to any bike rack, anywhere. But if you don't lock it to one of ours, we charge a fee. There's a flip side to that in that if you return that very bike to one of our station hubs, the system automatically gives you a $1 credit. So in many cases, it may be less expensive for you to take one of our bikes to go to an appointment, lock it out of hub, and come back, instead of getting in your car, driving around in circles for a half hour, trying to find a place to park, paying $2 an hour to park. Need I go on? Anyway, Social Bicycles won the contract because the technology was just so much more advanced. We get a lot of data out of it. Like I said, every trip we get a record of that, and we can do cumulative data on that, showing heat maps of where people frequent. And I can tell you that the Greenbelt is #1. So the new player is Dhoklas bike share. This is a concept that comes to us from China, where there are literally dozens of companies trying to enter this part of the market. And the technology is similar to what is on our bikes. Every bike is GPS enabled, and you unlock the bikes with a phone app. Every bike has a QR code on the back, so you open the app, you point your phone camera at the QR code, and magically the lock opens up, and then you can take your ride. Then you just ride the bike and leave it wherever you want. There's no other infrastructure. Generally speaking, these bikes aren't as high quality as some of the other bikes like ours or the B-Cycle bikes, because I think the companies consider them to be virtually disposable. After they get a year's worth of service out of them, they're done. They also have foam rubber tires instead of inflatable tires, because that is one of the main things that every bike share operator has to deal with, flat tires. If you don't deal with that, there's a lot less maintenance cost. And then there's a hybrid that has entered the market. It is a dockless bike share, but it has Lock 2 technology. And this is a Zagster bike. They are trying to reposition themselves as pace bicycles. So their bikes are similar to Dhoklas in that they have a lock that disables the rear wheel, but they also have a cable that travels with the bike that can be inserted into that lock so that the bike can be secured to something. This presumably reduces the chance of people punking your system, as has happened with the Dhoklas bike share. People will take those Dhoklas bikes, even if they're locked, and they can move them around into, say, rivers and streams, up in trees and other unusual places. This is supposed to reduce that. It is also supposed to provide more predictability on where to find the bikes, because you're going to lock them to something. And then this is really basic. You could do this tomorrow. It's the bike library. This is a picture from Aurora, Colorado. There was a similar system in Fort Collins. And like the name suggests, it works a lot like a library. You will go to a place where they have bikes, and you will check it out. It might be for a day, it might be for 3 days. Obviously not as flexible as the other services, because we're available 24 hours a day, and all you need is a phone app to find the bikes, so you can take them whenever you want. This is obviously a lot more low-tech and therefore lower cost. These bikes, sometimes they'll just buy a fleet of all the same bike. It might be a cruiser bike, or some systems even operate on donated bikes. And some systems actually operate out of physical libraries. So it's an interesting model, and one you might want to check out. So the whole purpose of this presentation is bringing bike share to your community. I'm a bicycle advocate. I have ridden a bike all my life. I delivered newspapers for 6 years in junior high and high school. I believe in biking. I commute by bike. I vacation by bike. My wife gets tired of me talking about bikes. But bike share, I think is a transformative technology. I think that it can change cities and make them more livable. So if that is the sort of thing that you want to bring to your community, here are some questions that I think you should be asking yourself. Why is it you want bike share? And delve deeply into this, because bringing bike share to your community could be a good thing, or it could just be kind of complicating. One of the things you need to look at is the infrastructure that your community has for biking. We're lucky. Boise has pretty good bike infrastructure. We thank ACHD for that. We have a commissioner here, Paul Woods, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think our system would have worked if we had tried to roll it out somewhere else. We have good bike lanes. We have the green belt, which is a tremendous draw for the people who ride our bikes. Some communities put the cart before the horse, in my humble opinion. They try to use bike share as a way to drive change in their community to improve bicycle infrastructure. Dallas, Texas, which is not a city known for its bike friendliness, now has the Dhoklas bike share. And now they're saying, hey, we're suddenly a biking community because we have 20,000 bikes on the street. But that doesn't make it safer for riders. Personally, I think it's better to have the infrastructure in place first and then bring bike share in. Who do you think is going to use bike share if you do bring it into your community? Here in Boise, I can define our audience in two distinct groups. We have weekday riders who are generally our annual members. They tend to take shorter trips. Their trips seem to be more utilitarian. They are riding from their office to a coffee meeting, to lunch, to the gym, that sort of thing. They don't ride as much on weekends. Our weekend riders tend to take longer, more leisurely rides. They start later in the day. I interpret that as being more recreational riders. We might call them tourists. And as I mentioned, the number one place for them to ride is the Greenbelt, followed closely by breweries and wineries, which some of them are located along the Greenbelt. Partnership is absolutely critical to try to bring bike share into your community. You need the buy-in from your community leaders, your county leaders. You need business representation in any committee that you would put together to try and bring bike share together. The nonprofit sector. The health sector is very interested in this because they obviously see the connection between getting people physically active and reducing healthcare costs. Our two title sponsors are deeply connected to healthcare. One is a hospital, St. Luke's. The other is a health insurer, SelectHealth. And then, how much is your community willing to commit financially to supporting bike share? Because these programs are not free. Though we'll talk about Dhoklas bike share, they come into the community and they say it's going to be free. There is going to be some investment. It'll be financial, it'll be time and effort on the behalf of the people running the program, on behalf of the community and the community leaders that you occupy a space in. So let's talk a little bit about some different models of running bike share. There are as many models of bike share as there are bike share programs, and there are something like 200 to 300 different bike share systems throughout the country now. One of the most common, at least up until recently, has been the nonprofit model. A nonprofit corporation is set up, and then it contracts with the city to run the program. This is advantageous to the city because cities often don't have the expertise in how to run a bike share system, and if you have some people who are really passionate about this, they've done their homework and they are going to know more about how to run it. So the city may provide direct financial support, or they may help leverage other support to a nonprofit. One of the advantages of the nonprofit model is that a nonprofit can apply for grant funding that a government agency may not be able to apply for. There are a few systems that are owned and operated by cities. I would say that these are in the minority across the country, again, because cities often don't have the expertise in this, nor do they have the interest in maintaining the infrastructure often involved with bike share. And then a growing segment of the market is one that Boise Green Bike helped to pioneer, where the system is owned and operated by a transit authority. We are a service of Valley Regional Transit. And we saw the advantages of this because we look at bike share as another form of mass transit. And there is a strong connection between transit and providing that first or last mile of someone's commute. So the other advantages are that Valley Regional Transit had an existing customer service telephone line that we could just add on to. Other duties as assigned, as people want to say. And we also use their financial system in bookkeeping and also purchasing. So that lends us certain advantages. So this is a growing trend. The system that operates in Haley operates under the Transit Authority as well. And down in Utah, where currently it's a nonprofit model, the Transit Authority for the Salt Lake Valley is looking at adopting bike share as one of their services. And then there are third-party operators. Perhaps the biggest is a company known as Motivate, and they operate the systems in New York and Boston and Montreal and a handful of other big cities. They also operate the system in Portland, Oregon, which is a social bicycle system like ours. They have a pretty good deal. They just have a flat rate that they get from the city to operate the system, and then they split whatever profits there might be. And let me emphasize, there are rarely profits in bike share. Well, here's how our particular system works. This is a graph from our latest annual report. We're owned and operated by Valley Regional Transit, which is a transit authority for Ada and Canyon County. Valley Regional Transit is governed by a board made up of elected representatives from both counties. In order for us to get the approval of the board, we made a deal. We said that we will take public dollars in the form of federal funds with a local match to buy the infrastructure, the bikes, the racks, the payment kiosks, and all of that. But we won't take public money for operations. We have to generate all of our operating budget from three major sources: ridership, membership, and sponsorship. And if you look at this graph, the 3/4 that is green is sponsorship. And the vast majority of that comes from our title sponsors, SelectHealth and St. Luke's. We thank them very much, and you should too. If you get sick, go to St. Luke's. So it's tough to be out there every day trying to raise sponsorship dollars. This is not an unusual model. Nearly every bike share system in the country doesn't make money off of ridership or membership. The few systems that come close are City Bike in New York City because they simply have so much density that they can generate more money from rides. Here's a similar graph from our sister system in Salt Lake City. They do a little bit better when it comes to ride revenue and membership revenue, but it still represents only about 1/3 of their operating budget. And if you look at the big green half there, that is their title sponsorship money, which comes from SelectHealth. They are the title sponsor, sole title sponsor down there. But it's a nonprofit organization. They are able to leverage some more sponsorship for stations and things like that. But as I mentioned, not really a money-making venture. It takes people to run bike share. The bikes don't magically fix themselves, nor do they magically move from one place to another. We run a really lean operation. There are just 3 of us. There's me, there is my shop manager, and a field tech. And they do the day-to-day maintenance of the bikes, moving the bikes around. I do just about everything else. That's government affairs, that's going out and landing sponsorships, that's doing our marketing, that's doing social media. And when we get into a crunch time, I actually go out and get my hands dirty and I move bikes and I fix bikes too. It's what you need to be, agile and efficient. And I don't know how we could be much more efficient. We have a little warehouse space at 10th and State. This picture is from the winter when we pull about half our bikes off the street, because ridership goes down pretty significantly starting about mid-October. And that gives us an opportunity to overhaul every bike, and then we rotate those out and bring the others in, so that come March 1st, when we go back to full strength, every bike is as good as new. So federal funding. This is truly the holy grail of funding bike share systems, at least it used to be. There are two major programs that bike share qualifies for. The first, it has this very catchy name called the Surface Station Block Grant Set-Aside, otherwise known as TAP funding, Transportation Alternatives Program. For the entire state of Idaho, there's about $3.5 million in TAP funding, and it is divvied up in four major categories. Boise is the largest metropolitan area in the state, so it gets its own block of funding. It's about $440,000. Then there is a block of funding for communities between 5,000 and 200,000 people. That's a big gap. And it gets almost $1 million. And then there is another block of funding for communities under 5,000, and that's only about $700,000. And then there are statewide TAP funds, and that amounts to almost $2 million. There are certain restrictions on the statewide TAP funds in that no single project can exceed $500,000, and all of the TAP funding requires a local match of 7.34%. But the feds look favorably upon communities and organizations that can overmatch, because that provides more local skin in the game and therefore more money overall for the project that you want to accomplish. And except for the Boise money, all of the other funding has to go through ITD for approval. The other major aspect of federal highways funding is something called STP, or the Surface Transportation Program. When we initially were funded through our local metropolitan planning organization, known as COMPAS, we had some STP funding, but at the final meeting before COMPAS, that funding was taken away from us. So instead of having about $600,000 to start out with, we had only about $300,000. And there's a reason for that. Most STP funding in the state goes to road maintenance programs. There's not as much of it, and it's often decided on an ITD district level. So in talking to the folks at Compass who are in charge of funding, the advice that they give is get to know the planners at your highway district, at your ITD district, and get to know the board members for ITD, because they can help to sway decisions. All right, well, here is the new kid on the block. As I mentioned, bike share is a really new industry. It's less than 10 years old in the United States. And the organization that governs us, the North American Bike Share Association, is just now celebrating its 4th birthday. So that gives you an idea of just how new the business is. It is constantly evolving. And the latest evolution is Dhoklas bike share. I touched upon this briefly, but here is a photo from one of the Dhoklas bike share providers, known as Otho. The thing that sets it aside is that there is no infrastructure associated with it. There is a lock on the bike. It is a lock that simply disables the rear wheel. So the bike can still be moved around even if it is locked. The bikes are app-driven, so you have to download the app, give them your credit card information in order to be able to unlock the bikes. There are some providers, Otho being one of them, that offers a keypad on the lock in addition to the QR code, but you still need to call the company to get the code to unlock the bike. They're generally not real high-quality bikes. They have anywhere from 3 to 8 speeds. They will have a dynamo hub to try and keep the battery alive, just like our bikes. There's a basket in front, hand brakes, and usually a bell and lights. So in many respects, not that different from the bikes that we have, but they're able to produce them very cheaply. By some estimates, these bikes cost no more than $200 or $300 a piece. But in China, where there are millions and millions of these bikes and dozens of providers, it has created enormous problems because they simply came in to the market uninvited, and the government took a really hands-off approach because they were dealing with traffic congestion and air pollution, and they actually saw this as a good way of addressing this. And there has been a pretty substantial mode shift in the way that people get to and from work or to and from transit. The problem is a lot of those people are going to the same places, and they're just throwing these bikes on street corners and clogging the sidewalks so that in some places it was completely impassable. And so now the jurisdictions have had to come in, sweep up the bikes, and they dump them in what are known as bicycle graveyards, where there are thousands and thousands of these bikes, and they sit there unclaimed because these are virtually disposable. And a lot of the companies that have entered this niche of the market have gone out of business, and so the bikes and their technology are completely defunct, and they're just being hauled off to a landfill, which seems like a terrible waste to me. Are we likely to see that here in the U.S.? No. I think the companies have learned a very hard lesson in China, but that's not to say that there won't be some problems. So let's go through some of the major players and what it may mean for communities here in Idaho. One of the big companies is Lime Bike. They operate in about 40 cities throughout the country, including Seattle, where they're one of 3 providers. They are venture capital funded. They are U.S. based. They have a lot of money. They will come into a community and say, we're going to offer you bike share services and it won't cost you a dime. They have an electric assist bike, and they also have an electric scooter, and they promise to bring a mix of those into any community that they come to. And they have a function on their website. If you go there, you can vote to bring Lime Bike to your community. So put your city on the map, and when you get to 500 votes, they supposedly will take a look at your community more seriously. But what are they really looking for? Well, they're looking for more density. They want to be able to deploy in a region, a group of communities where they can put a bunch of bikes and form a network between the communities. If you have a college or university in your community, they're going to look harder at your community because demographics show that young people are more likely to ride bikes than old people. I mentioned that they also operate in 40-some U.S. cities. And in the interest of full disclosure, they are looking at coming into Boise, Nampa, Eagle, and other communities in the Treasure Valley. Another one of the bike share companies that operates in Seattle is Otho. They too are venture capital funded, but they are a Chinese company. They're one of the companies that have millions of bikes in China. And when I say that they're venture capital funded, Lime Bike might have somewhere between $130 and $150 million in venture capital funding. Otho has billions. So they have a lot more clout in the marketplace. They have the same claim. They'll come to your city, offer bike share for no cost to you. They are developing an electric assist bike, and they don't yet have the scooter technology. And just the same as Lime Bike, they look for denser populations, groups of communities, and communities that have colleges or universities. I should also note that Otho has the distinct notoriety of being the only bike share company to be expelled from the North American Bike Share Association. And the reason for that is that they actively lobbied in the states of Florida and Oklahoma for exemption legislation that would have removed a local community's ability to control their streets when it comes to bike share. I'm happy to report that that legislation failed in both of those states, but I don't think that's going away. And there are other providers. You will see these in places like Dallas, where I think there are 5 or 6 companies operating. The orange bikes on the bottom are Spin Bikes. That's another U.S. Company. They operate in Seattle, but they don't seem to have the reach of the others, probably because they have less than $100 million in venture capital funding. Mobike, another Chinese company, and there are others, but I think you get the point. They're all pretty much the same. Many of them have bikes that have plastic spokes and foam rubber wheels. And then there's electric assist bikes. This is not just the wave of the future, it's the wave of the present. Our vendor, Social Bicycles, is doing business now as Jump Bikes, and this is their premier product. It is the Jump Bike. It is electric assist. It has a range of up to 40 miles, and it will propel you down the street as long as you pedal at a speed of between 15 and 18 miles an hour. They are test marketing it right now in San Francisco, some obvious benefits there. Also in Washington, D.C., and in the very near future, they will launch in Santa Cruz. They're most interested in large cities where they can get the most bang for their buck, and they won't even allow us to have the electric assist technology, which is disappointing because I would buy these bikes tomorrow. And if you Google Dallas bike mess, you will find hundreds of pictures like this. Dallas actually reached out to some of these Dhoklas bike share companies because they had no existing bike share program and said, come on in, we're not going to regulate you at all. So now there are at least 20,000 bikes in Dallas. And this is a typical street corner downtown. There's not a lot of bike infrastructure in Dallas, and the bikes are just left wherever people want to leave them. And not all of them are left upright, as you can see in this picture. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention something about electric scooters. This is the flavor of the day when it comes to mobility. It was started by a company out of Southern California, actually an executive who used to work for one of the car share companies and also worked for Uber. Bird cycles, those are the little black ones you see on the right. These just showed up in cities in Southern California, uninvited, hundreds at a time, and you have to push them to get it started, but after that, it will start to propel you up to 15 miles an hour. Not being one to be outdone, Lime Bike saw this and immediately came up with their own version of an electric scooter. And as I mentioned, Otho is working on their version, and there are some others trying to get into this space. It is part of the mobility mix. They're kind of fun to ride. I tried one out, but it also adds to the clutter on the street. And these things are a little bit smaller than a bike, but they can also still inhibit the transit of people in a wheelchair or who might have some other sort of disability. So there are other options if a Dhoklas bike share company doesn't think that you're big enough or important enough to come into your city. And I had a delightful conversation with a company known as Gotcha Bikes. They are a mobility company. They also offer van pool services. But they are US-based. They're based in South Carolina, and they offer a variety of services. They will listen to any community that is interested in bringing bike share into their community. They will take care of the planning, the operations, the maintenance, and even the funding of your program. They want you to succeed, and they tell me that there is no minimum level for the number of bikes that you could have with one of their systems. It's interesting that they use the same locking technology that our bikes do. They license that from Social Bicycles. They are also American-made bikes. They have had their greatest success on college and university campuses. But I think they're a good company, and they offer a variety of services. And if you'd like to check them out, I have a sheet up here with resources about many of the companies I've talked about. The other major player in this space is Zagster, and they are now trying to transition themselves into being called Pace Bike Share. They actually operate a system in Coeur d'Alene. I think that's the only Zagster system in the state. It is a little different model. This is the Lock 2 technology that they are pushing out right now, but they do offer some basic infrastructure. This is an example of some of their racks. Everything costs less under a Zagster system than it would under a social bicycle system. And if you want, you don't even need to buy their station hubs. The station hubs do give you an opportunity for some advertising revenue, so that is sometimes a good idea to have. Interesting company. The bikes aren't as high quality, and it's worth taking a look at. I can tell you one thing. I've started this journey about 6 or 7 years ago as a research project at Central District Health. And since then, I feel like I have a master's degree, maybe a PhD in bike share. And this is a phrase that I started using in the first year. And it becomes more and more true every day. This picture was taken last summer as we were readying 35 bikes for the Celebrity Green Bike race right before the Twilight Criterium. I had started my day at 6 a.m. for a race that started at 6 p.m., moving bikes around, tuning them up, pumping up the tires, corralling the celebrities, getting them to understand how the bikes work. If I look a little tired, I am. I just want to say that bike share isn't easy, but if you have a passion for it, you can bring it to your community. And it does have benefits as far as improving the health of your community and making your community more livable. Because if a community is more bikeable and more walkable, it's more livable and it's safer for everyone. So that concludes my formal remarks. I'm happy to answer questions. Shoot.
So as this gets more popular in a state like Idaho, I think it's wonderful that you have SelectHealth and St. Luke's as your sponsors. Do you foresee there being any competition in sponsorship if it increases in number? Do you see those sponsors wanting to make share dollars with other communities, wanting to up theirs? Or do you think that it's sort of locally?
Well, I know that SelectHealth has an interest in bike share. They sponsor us. They sponsor the one in Salt Lake. There is a Zagster system now in St. George, and they are one of the sponsors there. I think the healthcare sector in general is a big supporter of bike share across the country, and that would be one of the first places I would go to try and get funding to support either the operations or maybe even the start of a system. I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe to help answer that question is that the sponsors will sponsor if it's in their service area. So St. Luke's wouldn't consider sponsorship for a program at Coeur d'Alene, so to speak.
That's an excellent point.
And I also wonder, Dave, when you said those Dhoklas programs are free, is that the setup is free or are they free for the user?
Oh, they're not free for the user. They are free for the community that allows them to operate. For their pedal bikes, it is usually $1 for a 30-minute ride. For their electric products, it's $1 to unlock the device, and then it's 15 cents a minute. So that works out to about $10 an hour. We would love to have the electric technology because it would allow us to compete on an even footing. And, well, I think it would also broaden the number of people willing to ride. Yeah.
How have bike shops responded to bike share?
A mixed bag, honestly. At first, I think the bike shops that had their own rental fleet saw us as a threat, much as we see Dhoklas as a threat. But when they saw that it got more people interested in biking and that they then would go to the bike shop and purchase bikes, I think they became a lot more accepting. Generally, when you go to a bike shop to rent a bike, you're going to rent it for 24 hours at a time. And what we're constantly telling people is, you're sharing this rental with everyone else in the network. You're using it for only the amount of time that you need it, then you lock it up, and it's available to everyone else in the network. So it's a very different model of operations. I think we now coexist with the bike shops in a much better environment, and some of the bike shops have been very supportive of us and have allowed us to purchase spare parts at a discounted price. So I think we get along now. They don't hate us. Yeah.
If the why for your community was possibly to see this as a solution for low-income people, which company or model do you?
Well, if the Y were willing to take it on as one of their projects, they're already a nonprofit, so I could see that fitting very well into the services that they provide.
No.
That's not what you mean?
If the reason for bringing in bike share.
Oh, I thought you meant the YMCA, sorry.
Yeah, if the reason, if your motivation is to provide transportation for low-income sector people in your community that struggle with the cost of operating a car, what would you recommend?
Well, any of the operational models I talked about would work. And one of the big trends in bike share is equity. In fact, we're looking at creating our own equity program. The thing I've learned, especially this month when all rides are free, is that in order for people to value the service, they have to have some skin in the game. So what many of the programs do is they offer a very low annual membership in the system. It might be as low as $10 for an entire year. But they do have some skin in the game and they feel more responsible. I think it can serve as a way of helping those people get around, but you need the network density so that those bikes are actually getting people from point A to point B, from where they are to where they want to be. Just like any other customer, they have the same needs to go to doctor's appointments and go to the grocery store, take their kids places, things like that. So in many respects, a bike library might also be a good model to pursue if your sole focus is going to be on low-income people. And you had a question.
I had a question about the electric scooters. Those are part of these Dhoklas companies.
Yes.
And I presume that those are to be ridden on sidewalks at up to 15 miles an hour, and how cities are dealing with that in regards to dangers to pedestrians or other sidewalk users.
Well, some cities think that they ought to be in the bike lanes because 15 miles an hour is a great deal faster than a pedestrian walks. And it's become a hot topic on social media about what a hazard these scooters can be. It varies from city to city, and because these things just appeared overnight in many cities, there are no regulations whatsoever. And I can guarantee you that if these businesses think that this is a way to make money, it's going to enter the private sector, and these electric scooters are going to appear on their own under personal ownership. So it's something that cities are going to have to adapt to in some way. I tend to think that this is a flash in the pan, but I could be wrong.
I was just gonna say, where does this stop? I mean, you could go skateboards and segways, and my kids have I forgot what you call it, but you just lean forward and.
Yeah, those one-wheel things.
I mean, I don't know if it's gonna stop. I think it could get a lot worse before, I don't know.
No walking allowed.
Well, it's true. And the other phrase that I didn't put on my slide is that I've also learned that people are inherently lazy. We have increased the density of our bike share stations downtown where we get the most use, and yet people will still lock the bike half a block away because it's more convenient for them. We're happy to take their money. But yeah, I think these electric assist devices certainly aren't inspiring exercise, but it is, in many senses, a better choice than getting in a car to make that short trip. So there are trade-offs. Yeah.
You shared with us the pie graphs.
Yeah.
Do you have
Our initial system cost $324,000. That included the local match. And with that, we got 15 station hubs, 10 kiosks, and 114 bikes. So it's not insignificant. The thing that's attractive about Zagster is that they could probably come in and install that same number of bikes for maybe half that, because they don't have the kiosks. The kiosks for us cost about $10,000 a piece. And you really only use them once to become a member. It's a really expensive piece of equipment for such a short-term transaction. There's 10 of them. And let me tell you, they've been nothing but trouble.
Yeah. So better to just run it on your phone only.
Or go online.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to give kudos to you and your tiny team. I have seen you installing stations in 102-degree heat at the entrance of Fifth Street to the park. So kudos to you and your mighty but tiny team.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yeah.
The electric assist bikes customizable to comply with vehicle classification laws? As in, can you make them meet the maximum allowable before they become a moped?
Most of them fall into what I think California categorizes as Category 1. They rarely exceed 15 miles an hour. So there's no other modification necessary. When you get into Category 2 and 3, the speeds can exceed, I think in 3, they can go 30 miles an hour or something like that. And I should mention that these are electric assist. The motor doesn't kick in until you pedal. So it's not full throttle. Yeah.
How do you, I mean, you guys have your hands full with maintenance and what you're doing with the bikes, but the electric bikes I mean, how about changing those batteries and getting them recharged? Does that just bring a whole nother level of labor?
It does, and I did a research to Seattle where I rode all 3 of the operators up there, and I also rode the e-bike that Lime Bike operates. And they now have a 24-hour service operation, because what they do is they go out and they can monitor battery levels remotely through the bike, and they have a team that goes out at night, takes the battery that's run down, swaps it out, for a fully charged one. And so, yeah, it does add a lot of complication. I think one of the reasons our vendor is reluctant to let third-party operators like us have the technology is that they're still working out the charging technology. I should mention that the scooters, since the people who are running these came from the world of Uber and Lyft, they are crowdsourcing the charging of the scooters. So they have people who will go out, gather up the scooters, take them home, charge them up, and then put them back on the street the next day, and they get paid for that. So it's interesting. Yeah.
City uses that veterans group to help charge their e-bikes.
Who does that?
They have like a veterans group, that come out. I don't know, but it's Big Wind is the bike manufacturer.
Okay, okay.
They have that full 88 bike electric fleet.
Interesting.
In Park City.
Huh.
But it is a huge issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have one more question?
I was just interested if any of these companies had adult bicycles.
A few companies,
Offering any of those to
yeah, a few bike share providers, including Biketown in Portland, has adaptive technology available, but it works more like a bike library, because they can't leave trikes everywhere. And the needs of disabled can be very different. So you might have a hand cycle for one, a low-profile trike for another, side-by-side tandem for some other folks. But Biketown is probably the best example of that. There is information here if you want to take it on Green Bike and also the people that I talked about.